Welcome back to Game Theories, where I introduce a series of management, administration, and leadership. This is episode 46. Today, we'll explore prospect theory. It is a theory that explains how people make decisions under risk and uncertainty. The theory was proposed by Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky in 1979 in their widely cited article titled Prospect Theory and Analysis of Decision Under Risk. In the 1970s, decision-making research was heavily influenced by rational choice theory, which was the dominant paradigm. If you want to know more about rational choice theory, check out my previous video on this theory. Simply put, rational choice theory states that people make decisions by systematically evaluating options and selecting the one that maximizes their utility. For example, the commonly used cost-benefit analysis is based on rational choice theory. Cost-benefit analysis is a systematic approach to evaluate the strengths and weaknesses of alternatives. To conduct a cost-benefit analysis, we compare the total expected cost of a project or a decision against the total expected benefits to determine the best option. This method is grounded in the principles of rational choice theory. It operates under the assumption that decision makers act rationally to maximize their net benefits. However, Kahneman and Tversky challenge this assumption with the prospect theory. They argue that people don't always act rationally. Instead, our decisions are often influenced by potential losses and gains in ways that deviate from the predictions of rational choice theory. Rational choice theory is built on the principles of a theory that was proposed in 1944 called expected utility theory. This theory laid the groundwork for rational choice theory. So, what does expected utility theory explain? It assumes rational behavior, where people have consistent preferences and make decisions aimed at maximizing their expected utility. Essentially, it provides a framework for making decisions under uncertainty. The theory states that people evaluate potential outcomes by weighing the utility or value of each outcome by its probability. We then choose the option with the highest expected utility. Imagine you were a scientist studying decision-making in the 1970s. You notice that the assumptions of expected utility theory and the rational choice theory did not hold. We do not always act rationally. Instead, we are influenced by potential losses and gains, leading to decisions that deviate from expected utility. Here, expected utility means that we evaluate risk options by considering the potential outcomes, weighting them by their probabilities, and choosing the option with the highest overall value. However, real-world decisions often show that we fear losses more than we value equivalent gains. For example, here are two options. Option A, you have a 50% chance to win $100 and a 50% chance to lose $50. Option B, no gamble, and you keep your current amount of money. If you are like most people, you are more likely to choose option B, even though option A has a positive expected utility. Why? This is how we calculate the expected utility of option A. The probability of winning $100 is 0.5, is 50%. So the expected value from this outcome is 0.5 times 100 equals 50. The probability of losing $50 is also 50%. So the expected value from this outcome is 0.5 times minus 50 equals minus 25. So the expected utility of option A is $50 plus minus $25 equals $25. This means that on average, if you were to take this gamble many times, you would expect to gain $25 per gamble. Despite the risk of losing $50, the potential gain of $100 weighted by their respective probabilities results in a positive expected utility. In option B, you keep your current money, resulting in an expected utility of 0, assuming the reference point is keeping your current amount of money. According to rational choice theory, with option A, because it has a higher expected utility. However, most people choose option B. This difference can be explained by loss aversion, a key construct in prospect theory where the pain of losing $50 is felt more intensely than the pleasure of winning $100. This observation led to the development of prospect theory by Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky. Prospect theory challenges traditional economic assumptions by highlighting how psychological biases such as loss aversion influence our decision-making. Let's look at the key constructs and theoretical propositions of prospect theory. The first key construct is value function. Unlike traditional utility functions, which consider total wealth, the value function in prospect theory is defined over gains and losses. For example, you are playing a game where you can either win or lose money. Traditional economics would tell us to look at our total wealth after each round, but the prospect theory tells us to focus on the changes, the wins and losses, relative to our current situation. Now, here is where it gets interesting. The value function is concave for gains and convex for losses. This means that the function bends differently for gains and losses. For example, you lose $1 pencil. The emotional reaction is likely strong. You may think, I can't believe I lost my pencil. This is frustrating, even though it's just $1. The loss is felt deeply because of the steep negative slope of the value function. Now, let's imagine you find a $1 pencil. You can feel a brief moment of happiness thinking, oh, cool, I found a pencil. However, this positive feeling is less intense and shorter-lived compared to the negative feeling of losing the pencil. Moreover, concave for gains also suggests diminishing sensitivity to gains, which can be explained by how the dopaminergic system works in our brains. The dopaminergic system, particularly the release of dopamine in the brain, is known to be associated with the reward system. As we experience rewards, the release of dopamine contributes to the feelings of pleasure and satisfaction. Over time, and with repeated exposure to rewards, the dopaminergic response can diminish. This means that the same reward will produce a smaller increase in dopamine release, which aligns with the concept of diminishing sensitivity. Imagine your favorite comfort food. Sometimes that can bring you immense joy and satisfaction. Maybe it's a rich, creamy mac and cheese or a delicious slice of chocolate cake. Now, think about the first bite you take after not having it for a while. It's pure bliss, right? But what if you had to eat your comfort food for every single meal? Initially, you may be excited. However, over time, each meal would bring you less and less satisfaction. The first bite of mac and cheese was heavenly, but by the 10th meal, it's just food. You lose the feelings of satisfaction because you are experiencing it too often. Here is another example of diminishing sensitivity to reward. You initially have $1,000 and receive another $1,000. This gain significantly increases your happiness. However, if you already have $100,000, receiving another $1,000 won't make as much of a difference to your overall happiness. The first $1,000 had a large impact, but each subsequent $1,000 has less and less impact on their utility. Now, let's look at convex for losses. The value function is steeper for losses, demonstrating loss aversion. This means losses hurt more than equivalent gain feels good. Losing $20 feels worse than finding $20 feels good. Let's say you find $50 a day but lose $50 the next day. Even though you are back to where you started, the emotional impact of losing $50 feels much worse than the joy of gaining $50. This asymmetry is important because it explains why people often avoid risk, even when the potential gains outweigh the losses. For example, imagine you are offered a gamble with a 50% chance to win $200 and a 50% chance to lose $100. Although the expected utility is positive, $100, many people would reject this gamble because the pain of possibly losing $100 is more intense than the pleasure of winning $200. The value function focuses on those changes rather than the final outcome. Now, you can think about how to use the value function to design better incentives to motivate people. The second key construct of prospect theory is the reference point. Imagine every decision you make is measured against an invisible baseline. This is your reference point. It is often the status quo or your current state. Instead of evaluating outcomes in absolute terms, prospect theory tells us that we judge gains and losses relative to this reference point. For example, let's say you currently have $100 in your wallet. This $100 is your reference point. Now, if you find $50 on the ground, you experience this as a gain because you've increased your money relative to the $100 you had. On the other hand, if you lose $50, you experience this as a loss, again, relative to your original $100. Here is another example. You are negotiating your salary for a new job. Your current salary, which is your reference point, is $50,000 a year. You receive two job offers. Offer A, $55,000 a year. Offer B, $60,000 per year, but with a higher commuting cost that effectively make it feel like $52,000 a year. Even though offer B has a higher absolute salary, you may perceive it as a smaller gain or even a loss once you factor in the commuting cost compared to your current situation. Your evaluation is based on how those offers change your financial situation from your reference point, not just their absolute values. Marketers often leverage the reference point to influence consumer behavior. A product is initially priced at $100. If it is then discounted to $70, the $70 is perceived as a gain relative to the original $100 price. This can make the discounted price seem more attractive even if the product's value hasn't changed. The reference point explains why people are often more satisfied with a bonus that exceeds with their expectations, which is a reference point, rather than a larger bonus that falls short of a higher expectation. If you expect a $5,000 bonus and receive $7,000, you perceive it as a significant gain. However, if you expect a $10,000 bonus and receive $9,000, despite the higher amount, it feels like a loss relative to your expectation. The third construct is loss aversion. It means that losses hurt more than gains feel good. This sounds straightforward, but its implications are widespread. Think about gym membership. Many people sign up for annual gym memberships with the best intentions. However, the pain of seeing that money go to waste, a loss, can be a stronger motivator to attend the gym than the actual desire to exercise. This is why some fitness programs use financial penalties for missed sessions. They are leveraging loss aversion to boost attendance. The fourth key construct is probability weighting. This construct explains a lot about how we perceive risk and make decisions. Unlike what you expect, people don't see probabilities in a straightforward, linear way. Instead, our minds play tricks on us, leading to sometimes irrational behavior. In simple terms, probability weighting means that we tend to give disproportionate weight to unlikely events while downplaying more likely ones. Let's look at an example we all know, playing the lottery. The probability of winning a major lottery is incredibly low, often in the millions to 1. However, millions of people buy lottery tickets regularly. Why? We overweight the tiny probability of winning. The dream of a life-changing jackpot looms so large in our minds that we ignore the astronomical odds against it. This skewed perception of probabilities also influences our everyday decisions too. Many people fear flying more than driving, even though the probability of dying in a car accident is much higher than in a plane crash. The rare but dramatic nature of plane crashes makes them seem more likely and scarier than they statistically are, leading people to overweight the risk of flying. Probability weighting also impacts health decisions. Consider how people react to the risk of a rare disease versus a common one. A disease with a 1 in a million chance of occurrence can cause widespread panic and lead to costly medical checks and preventative measures, while more common health risks like heart disease might be underestimated and neglected, even though they pose a much greater actual threat. Marketers and insurance companies leverage probability weighting. For example, extended warranties on electronic products play on the overweighted fear of a device failure, despite the actual low probability of this happening within the warranty period. Similarly, insurance for rare events like travel insurance for unlikely trip cancellations becomes more appealing because people overweight the small probability of those events. The fifth construct is a framing effect. It means that our choices are significantly swayed by how the information is presented, even if the underlying facts remain unchanged. Our decisions are not purely based on logic, but are heavily influenced by the context and presentation of options. For example, your doctor gives you 2 treatments. Treatment A. This treatment has 90% survival rate. Treatment B. This treatment has a 10% mortality rate. Logically, both statements provide the same information. However, patients are more likely to choose treatment A because it's framed as having a 90% survival rate rather than treatment B with a 10% mortality rate. The positive framing of survival feels more reassuring, while the negative framing of mortality feels more threatening. The framing effect is a staple in marketing strategies. Consider how discounts are presented. Option A, save $20 on your purchase. Option B, get $20 off your purchase. And both options offer the same financial benefit, but save $20 emphasize the positive action you are taking, while getting 20% off may seem like a lesser incentive. Retailers understand this and often frame discounts in ways that maximize their appeal. After learning prospect theory, let's look at limitations and criticisms of the prospect theory. One of the fundamental assumptions of prospect theory is that we know the probabilities of different outcomes when making decisions. Think about the decisions you've made recently. Did you always know the exact probabilities of each possible outcomes? Probably not. In the real world, probabilities are often ambiguous or completely unknown. Prospect theory explains decisions under risk, where the probabilities of outcomes are known. But many real-world decisions are made when the probabilities are unknown or not well-defined. This is a significant limitation because prospect theory doesn't fully address how people make decisions under ambiguity. In fact, decisions with known probabilities represent only a fraction of the decisions we make. This boundary of the prospect theory has led researchers to develop alternative models that extend or complement it in order to address decisions with unknown probabilities. Those models, like ambiguity aversion, the multiple priors model, and the maximum expected utility model, helps us understand decision-making when probabilities are ambiguous. Let's break them down. Ambiguity aversion describes how people tend to prefer known risk over unknown risk. For example, if the choice between a bet of a known 50% chance of winning $100 and a bet with an unknown probability of winning $100, most people choose the known probability. This preference for certainty over ambiguity is something that the prospect theory does not fully capture. The multiple priors model assumes that people consider a range of possible probabilities of an uncertain event. Instead of a single expected probability, we evaluate the worst-case scenario among those possible distributions. This cautious approach helps explain behavior under true uncertainty, where probabilities are not just unknown, but also variable. The maximum expected utility model focuses on maximizing the minimum expected utility. This model assumes that decision-makers evaluate each action based on the worst-case expected utility across all considered probability distribution. By doing so, it addresses the ambiguity in decision-making that prospect theory overlooks. Now, let's move on to another criticism, the overweighting of small probabilities. Consider the example of lottery tickets. Prospect theory predicts that people overweight small probabilities, which explains why they may buy lottery tickets despite the low chances of winning. This seems to hold true generally, but studies have shown that this overweighting can vary significantly among individuals and contexts. Some people may exhibit extreme risk aversion in small probability contexts, while others might be risk-seeking. This indicates that other psychological factors or individual differences may influence their decisions, which prospect theory does not fully account for. For example, in health decisions, some people may overweight the small probability of a rare disease and undergo extensive and costly tests, while others might ignore it completely. In financial decisions, one investor may shy away from a stock due to a small chance of a significant loss. Another may embrace the risk, hoping for a large gain. Those variations show that human behavior is influenced by a broader range of factors than prospect theory account for. Understanding those criticisms helps us appreciate the complexity of human decision-making and the ongoing efforts to refine those models. Now, it is your turn to apply prospect theory to your own decision-making. Identify the situations where prospect theory works and where it falls short. Reflect on how you can refine prospect theories or even propose new theories to provide better explanations of decision-making processes. By critically engaging with prospect theory and its constructs, you can enrich our understanding of human decision-making.